It was a crisp morning when Clara, an elderly black woman with a warm smile and a quiet strength, decided to visit the newly opened restaurant in town. Her son Daniel had worked tirelessly to buy the place, pouring his heart and savings into making his dream come true. Today, she planned to surprise him with her first visit. Clara dressed in her Sunday best, a modest hat perched on her head, and carried a small bouquet of flowers to congratulate him. She was brimming with pride. As she approached the front door, a tall, stern-looking security guard stood in her path. His uniform was crisp, and his demeanor was anything but welcoming. "Sorry, ma'am," he said, holding up his hand. "We don't serve people like you here." Clara's heart sank, but she stayed calm. Surely, this was some kind of mistake. She explained she wasn't just there to eat. She had a special connection to this place. But the guard didn't budge, his voice growing firmer with each word. Clara was left standing there, clutching her flowers, her pride momentarily overshadowed by the sting of rejection. What the guard didn't know was that this restaurant wasn't just any place, it was her son's. And Clara wasn't leaving quietly. Clara stood at the entrance, the crisp morning air doing little to cool the heat rising in her chest. She looked at the security guard, his posture rigid, his eyes scanning her as though she didn't belong. The flowers in her hand felt heavier now, her excitement dimmed but not extinguished. Clara was no stranger to moments like this, but it stung all the same. She had worked hard her whole life, raising Daniel with the belief that kindness and determination could overcome anything. The restaurant had been Daniel's dream since he was a boy. She remembered how, as a teenager, he would sketch out menus and talk endlessly about creating a space where everyone felt welcome. When he finally bought the place, Clara was there to help him paint the walls, pick out furniture, and hang pictures of their family in the cozy corners. She knew every detail of this restaurant, down to the smell of fresh bread coming from the kitchen. But now, standing on the sidewalk, she felt like a stranger outside a place she had helped build. Why was this guard so adamant about keeping her out? Clara took a deep breath, determination filling her heart. She wasn't about to let this moment pass. Clara took another step forward, her voice steady but firm. "I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding," she said, her eyes meeting the guard's. But he didn't waver. "Rules are rules," he replied coldly, his tone sharp enough to cut through the morning air. Clara tilted her head, studying him for a moment. She wondered if he even realized the weight of his words. Inside the restaurant, the sound of laughter and clinking dishes spilled out onto the street. Clara's mind raced as she thought about Daniel, probably busy in the kitchen, unaware of the scene unfolding at the door. She pictured him in his crisp white apron, greeting customers with the warmth that had always been his trademark. The thought gave her the strength to push back. "You really don't know who I am, do you?" she said, a small, knowing smile breaking through her frustration. The guard's expression didn't change, but Clara noticed a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "Doesn't matter," he muttered, glancing toward the dining room. "I have a job to do." Clara's grip on the flowers tightened. Her instincts told her this wasn't just about her. It was about something deeper, something she couldn't yet see, and she wasn't about to walk away without answers. Clara's patience was wearing thin, but her resolve was unshaken. She took a step closer to the guard, her voice steady. "You're making a mistake," she said, her eyes locking with his. He shifted uncomfortably but didn't move aside. "Ma'am, if you don't leave, I'm going to have to call someone," he said, his tone less confident than before. Clara felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every time someone like her had been told they didn't belong. Inside, Daniel was moving between tables, checking on guests and offering his usual warm smile. He hadn't noticed his mother was late, assuming she'd be there any minute. Back at the door, Clara's determination flared. She wasn't about to let this man's ignorance overshadow the pride she felt for her son's success. Just as she opened her mouth to speak again, the door behind the guard swung open, and a young waitress stepped out. She froze when she saw Clara. "Oh no," the waitress whispered, her face pale. "That's Before she could finish, the guard interrupted, his hands still blocking Clara. "Go back inside," he said. The waitress hesitated, torn between obeying and speaking up. Clara could see the tension on her face, and for a moment, everything seemed to hang in the air. The waitress hesitated for a moment too long, and Clara caught the look in her eyes. Recognition, guilt, and a flicker of fear. Before the waitress could retreat, Clara spoke up, her voice calm but commanding. "Young lady, do you know who I am?" The waitress glanced nervously at the guard, then back at Clara. She started, but the guard cut her off. "It doesn't matter who she is. She's not getting in without an invitation," he barked, his tone sharper now, as if to assert control over the situation. Clara didn't flinch. "An invitation," she said, raising an eyebrow. "I didn't realize mothers needed one to visit their sons." The waitress's eyes widened, and the guard stiffened, suddenly unsure of himself. Clara continued, her voice steady but firm. "I am Daniel's mother, the owner's mother, and you've been standing here, blocking me from entering a place I helped build." The guard's face paled, but before he could respond, the door behind him opened again, this time with more force. Daniel stood there, his expression a mix of confusion and anger. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned his place. Clara looked at her son, her pride and frustration mingling as she prepared to tell him everything. But before she could speak, the waitress blurted out, "He wouldn't let her in, Daniel. He didn't know she was your mother." Daniel's eyes darkened as he turned to the guard. "Is that true?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with an edge that made everyone stop. The guard stammered, but before he could answer, Clara stepped forward. "It's true," she said, her gaze unwavering. "But now I want to know why." The tension crackled in the air, and everyone standing there knew this wasn't just about a misunderstanding anymore. There was something deeper at play, and Clara was determined to get to the bottom of it. Daniel's gaze stayed fixed on the guard, his usually warm expression now cold and unreadable. "Explain yourself," he said, his voice steady but unmistakably firm. The guard stumbled over his words, his confidence unraveling. I didn't know, sir. She didn't look." He stopped himself, realizing too late that his words had already done more damage than silence could. Clara raised her chin, her voice calm but cutting. "Didn't look like what? Like someone who belongs here?" Her question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The guard's face turned crimson as he stammered, "I didn't mean it like that." Daniel stepped between them, his voice low but commanding. "You didn't mean it like what?" "You didn't mean to judge someone by how they look. To stop my mother, the woman who raised me, from stepping into the restaurant she helped me build." The guard was silent now, unable to meet Daniel's eyes. The small crowd that had gathered began to whisper, their curiosity growing as they watched the scene unfold. Clara placed a gentle hand on her son's arm, her voice softening. "Let him explain, Daniel. I want to hear it." The guard hesitated, his defenses crumbling under the weight of their stares. I thought she was lost, or maybe causing trouble. I didn't know who she was. I just thought I was doing my job." Daniel took a deep breath, his anger tempered by his mother's presence. "Your job," he said quietly, "is to treat everyone who walks through that door with respect. If you can't do that, you don't belong here." The guard's shoulders slumped, and he nodded, unable to argue. Just as the tension seemed to ease, a voice came from the crowd. "Excuse me, but I think there's more to this." Everyone turned to see an older woman, dressed sharply, stepping forward. Clara's eyes widened in recognition. It was the previous owner of the restaurant. "I sold this place to your son," the woman said, looking at Daniel. "And I've heard whispers about this guard before. Complaints from customers who felt unwelcome, but I didn't know it had gotten this bad. I'm so sorry." Her words sent a ripple of surprise through the crowd, and Daniel realized this wasn't an isolated incident. Clara gave the guard one last look, her voice steady. "Maybe this is a lesson for everyone here, about assumptions, about respect, and about second chances. But it's up to you what you do with it. She turned to Daniel, her smile returning. "Now, my son, how about showing your mother around her favorite restaurant?" The crowd murmured in approval as Daniel took her hand and led her inside, leaving the guard standing alone, forced to confront the consequences of his actions. But just before the door closed, Clara looked back at the guard and said softly, "Everyone deserves a chance to do better. I hope you take yours." Her words lingered, a final twist that left everyone thinking as the door shut behind her. Inside the restaurant, Clara's heart swelled as she looked around. The warm lighting, the inviting smell of food, and the laughter of happy customers made it feel like home. Daniel guided her to a table near the wall where family photos hung. She smiled, recognizing the picture of her and Daniel from years ago, taken when things were much harder. Now, those struggles felt far behind them. As they sat, Daniel reached across the table and held her hand. "I'm so sorry, Mom. That never should have happened." Clara gave his hand a squeeze. "Don't apologize for someone else's actions," she said gently. "What matters is how you handled it, and you did me proud." In the days that followed, Daniel quietly replaced the guard with someone who better reflected the values he wanted his restaurant to stand for. He also used the experience as a lesson for his entire staff, emphasizing the importance of respect and kindness to everyone who walked through their doors. For Clara, the day became a reminder of why she had worked so hard all those years. Seeing her son thrive, surrounded by a community that appreciated him, made everything worthwhile. And as she left the restaurant that day, she felt nothing but pride.